The land down under has never been easier to reach. United Airlines has more flights between the U.S. and Australia than any other U.S. airline, so you can fly nonstop to destinations like Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. Explore dazzling cities, savor the very best of Aussie cuisine, and get up close and personal with the wildlife. Who doesn't want to hold a koala? Go to united.com/Australia to book your adventure.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Psych Mom Show. Today, we're going to be talking about emotional labor, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about. Before we get into that, please do subscribe. Most recent subscriber episode was about everything ends, and it's meaningful. It's life-changing. No, it's pretty good, like all the others. So you get 170 plus others if you subscribe, so have at it and subscribe. It's only $8.99 a month, and it makes me happy. All right, so emotional labor is a trendy term. Originally, it was meant to showcase the labor done emotionally. Like originally it made sense, and it was a sociological term for people who have jobs where they have to be happy and smiling all the time, like flight attendants, the servers, etc. You have to be happy, otherwise you don't get paid, you get fired. What you're getting paid for is having a certain emotion and having that obvious on your face. All right, this makes sense, right? Somehow this term got co-opted to mean basically doing anything in the house that you don't want to do. And I talk about this in my Fair Play podcast, and I talk about it in my podcast, Do You Think Your Husband Asking You How Can He Help Is a Burden, and other podcasts I have, and I have lots of posts on it. If you go to drpsychmom.com and you type in emotional labor, you'll get a bunch of them. So basically, anything that you don't want to do is emotional labor. So, because if you say you want to do it, then you're admitting it's not labor. So it's funny like that. So, I also have another related podcast. If you would want to do it after divorce, don't complain about doing it now. So that's a good example. So recently in my Facebook group, and you should all join my Facebook group, it's only $4.99 a month. So that's a real steal, even compared to the podcast, which is $8.99 a month. And it's the blue subscribe button on Facebook. But people were talking about picking the summer camp. And some people say it's emotional labor. I personally like picking the summer camp. You get to pick where they go to camp. So that's that's the good part of it, right? So if you don't want to do that, right, then your spouse, if you have a spouse. Now, if you don't have a spouse, man, you are doing a lot of emotional labor. If it's just you, there's no co-parent, you never get a break, you're completely single parent, hats off, because then you really are doing emotional labor, because even when you don't feel like being happy and you don't feel like doing anything, you still have to work and you have to care for the kids, and it's constant and there's no break and nobody helps you with anything at all. So kudos to those people. However, most people are not in that situation. They're either divorced with co-parent, or they are a co-parent who has some custody, or they have a parent, a co-parent in the house called their spouse. And so in these cases, there's a lot of people that are complaining about doing stuff that they still want to do. But then somehow they're complaining basically to brag that they're doing something that they're now saying is difficult, so then they have a reason to brag about it. Like, for example, the summer camp. So you pick out a summer camp. I think this is cool because, I'm like any parent in my demographic. I'm really into their enrichment, Oh, goddamn, got to enrich them for sure. So what are their interests? Oh, well, man, let's make a list of all their special little interests that, of course, they'll never remember next year that they had these interests. But let's find summer camps based on that. Now, I like doing that. I know a lot of women like doing that, but for some reason, now women are saying that they don't like doing it. And some of them may not like doing it, but here's the kicker, that the way that the husband would do it is bad. He's not putting in the emotional labor to figure out what's a good summer camp. So instead, he's just, quote, and he's just as in quotes, he's just deciding that they should go to camp where their friends go to camp. Oh my God, what a terrible man, what a Nazi. And so instead of figuring out that they're going to go to the sculpture basket weaving camp, they're just going to go to the Y with their friends, where they're also going to have equivalent fun, possibly more fun than underwater basket weaving class. So, but this is bad because he didn't put in enough emotional labor. So if you are literally making problems for yourself and making things into larger tasks, because you have anxiety, but then you are saying that it is required emotional labor and that your spouse or your ex-spouse is remiss because they don't put in the same amount of anxiety, which you call emotional labor, into all the decisions, then you see how this is illogical, and it perpetuates a cycle of constant anxiety. Most people that are really into this emotional labor thing are over functioning. They're over-functioning. They're doing way more than they need to do, and they do not have any perspective that, yes, they like to, or maybe they don't like to. Maybe out of anxiety, they are picking the summer camp. That is what they perceive is the best, perfect one, but that isn't necessary, and that is a choice. Instead, they're saying that is required emotional labor that's not being split by the spouse. So basically, emotional labor is a way to say, I am doing something out of anxiety because, and there are some exceptions, any person that is at all functional will split. Just kind of, it's like altruism. When you have a kid that's pre-verbal, they've done experiments that even pre-verbal children will go, if they see in this laboratory setting, the experimenter has a bunch of stuff in his hands or her hands, and they walk and the door doesn't open, the door is closed, they will go, to tell the parent to open the door. People like to help. People are pro-social. People are altruistic at heart. There are very, very few people, and I'll get to the ones who don't in 1 second, very, very few people will not split a workload that they consider rational. Now, what are the exceptions? The exceptions are people with profound depression or ADHD or other more severe mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar, etc. There's some people who are non-functional. They're addicted. They're laying around all the time. They can't even go to work. Like, these people can't split a workload. That's for sure. And that's a terrible situation. And then everything certainly does feel quite laborious and onerous because you are basically with a sick person. And they are in a sick role because of their mental health, or maybe because of their physical health. Maybe they are a sick person. Maybe they have cancer. Maybe they have a condition. Maybe they just broke their leg. Maybe who knows what, But that person cannot help. However, I don't see a lot of people like that. What I do see is a lot of people, a lot of men who refuse to split what they consider to be an anxiety-driven, bloated workload that is considered necessary emotional labor, and they feel like they are in crazy town and that they're being gaslighted because the woman is saying things, for example, like, we need to put in 20 hours of effort to figure out what camp the kid can go to, instead of saying this would be nice if we both sat down and had this discussion together, or man, I want to work on my anxiety because every night as I go to sleep, I think about them not enjoying summer camp if I pick the wrong one. And that can't be right. People can't feel like that. That must be my anxiety. Of course, it's really very hard to know that you have anxiety and to have that awareness. I have a million podcasts and posts on how to recognize your anxiety. Maybe this could be your epiphany moment if you're listening and you thought it was totally normal to have those nighttime terrors about summer camp. It's not. It's anxiety. But anyway, I see a lot of men who are like, what do you mean this is emotional labor? Also, like, guys do a lot of stuff too. I talk about that all the time. They do a lot of housework, a lot of childcare. Anybody who goes to therapy, any guy who's open-minded enough for therapy is definitely splitting their shit, at home. And sometimes they're doing a lot more, honestly. And I have podcasts on that. But anyway, the point is, what happens is that emotional labor gets wielded as a way to say basically whatever I, the wife and the mother, think of as necessary to make this home run is something, not home run in baseball, this house run, be managed correctly, is what you should agree on. And so therefore we have to split that. And that can't be right, right? Yeah, I mean, like think about it the other way. What if the guy tried to say that? What if he tried to say, I think that the amount of sex we need to have is 3 times a day. So I would like you to initiate. I can't even get it out without laughing. 1.5 times on average per day, I would like you to initiate sex. It's like, how'd you just decide on that number? Like, that's not a number that I find reasonable. And that's exactly how the man feels about all the emotional labor. And so what happens is often an anxious woman will be partnered with a man with ADHD. For many reasons. First of all, she found her life's meaning in organizing his shit right from the beginning. She sees his room, it's all hoarded, it's gross. She sees he didn't make a dentist appointment in 5 years. She comes in and does it. She basically is type A. She found her project, and her project is him. She has kind of low self-esteem for other reasons. And so, because she has anxiety, so she always worries she's not going to get married, this and that, all of it, now she found somebody. It's her husband. On a subconscious level, she's like, man, he needs me a lot, so he'll never leave, etc. And then she has children, and she's like, wait, why is he still this same guy? But she doesn't see it like that. She somehow thinks he got worse. He probably got worse after the honeymoon stage. Everybody looks worse, and they act worse, and they're not all, high on dopamine and shit. So they act worse and whatever, but they don't usually act that much worse. And so now she's upset, right? And she's upset because her anxiety has gone through the roof since children. Postpartum anxiety is a real thing. And we have tremendously high standards for women in this society as mothers. And I talk about that all the time. You're expected to be completely attuned to every single thing your child says at all times. And remember every morsel that comes through their lips, and then also enrich the fuck out of them, all the time. And so feels like she's totally stressed. And so she decides the amount of emotional labor we need to put into this household across areas is about 20 waking hours a day. This motherfucker will not agree to take 10. He won't, because that's nuts, right? That's crazy. And so we do not want that to be where the story ends. Of course, if you say it takes 5 hours a day, that seems reasonable, right? I mean, and you could be like, well, how would I know those numbers? Especially if you're anxious. Talk to a therapist. Talk to another objective person. Talk to your pastor if you want. Talk to whoever you want. And talk to enough people if it's not a professional and you gotta crowdsource, but don't crowdsource from your own friend group, because as I say everywhere, there's something called social homophily. And that means that avoidant guys who are never home make friends with other avoidant guys who are never home and assume that the default is to never be home. And anxious women make friends with other anxious women, and they assume that you need, a 50-hour work week of emotional labor to keep the children even barely alive. And everybody goes to in terms of your friend group, which is why I originally said a therapist would be a good choice. And so, or a coach, or anybody that has experience with knowing what's normal, what's within the hump of the bell curve. And so in the normal distribution, do you need, to have 3 different types of cereal at all times for the children? Otherwise, you're a bad mother. And if somebody forgets to buy one of the types of cereal, then they're a piece of shit. Or is that maybe mobilized by anxiety and resentment and so forth? So basically, you could reality test with somebody. Or also, you could just do a deep dive and be like, am I just incredibly fucking anxious? Is that the elephant in the room? Yeah, of course he may have ADHD, or maybe he's just a dick or avoidant attachment or whatever's wrong with him. But am I just really, really anxious? Do I stay up all night thinking about what I could better do in the home and with the kids? Do I make work for myself? Has anybody ever given me that feedback? Is it something known about me that I overwork, overprepare, overfunction? If so, if that really tickles the outside of your brain and you're like, yeah, you know what, that resonates, then go to therapy and figure out, do you really have to be doing all this stuff? Because, remember, somebody with OCD would say that part of the emotional labor of the household is checking the oven 15 times before you leave the house. And then they would say to the husband, if we continue with this metaphor, that he has to check the stove 7.5 times in order to split the load. So then he's doing 7.5 times, but it's 100% of crazy. And, it's not pejorative at all. OCD is a condition, but you see that behavior would be irrational. That behavior would be disordered. So you can't just pick a bunch of shit and decide that he has to do half of it. And it's not intentional at all. It's not intentional. You think it's all necessary. But why should that be where the story ends? Why do you know what's necessary and what's not necessary? So you got to have somebody tell you kind of, is this even within the realm of normal or not, And if not, maybe you could take it down a notch and he would do half of that. emotional labor. And then what emotional labor that he does is being discounted, such as doing the home management of the finances, doing everything outside. Whenever you have a problem in the house, telling him about it and assuming that he'll fix it. Now, if you really do have a husband that does absolutely nothing, then you got to refer back to my overfunctioning podcasts, because that's not a usual situation. That's a situation you likely saw growing up. Your mom enabled your dad to just sit around or drink or cheat or be absent or whatever, and then you're replicating it with a guy that doesn't do those exact things but is basically a non-functioning person. And so that therapy can help you there as well. But what we don't want is to be intellectually lazy and to have the story end with whatever I think is the emotional labor that needs to be done should be done. And full stop. If he doesn't do exactly half of that on top of whatever else he does for work, then he's an asshole and he's a bad feminist and he's a bad guy, because that does not make sense either. And so if you're a guy listening to this and you're like, how do I get my wife to listen to your podcast? She doesn't like it. Like, okay, not everybody likes it. Why don't you use your own words and say to her, I'd like to go to couples counseling. It seems that I'm always upsetting you and offending you and disappointing you. That makes me sad. I want to figure out, am I really, like missing something big here with this emotional labor construct? Or like, is there a better way for us to divide things? Whatever we're doing now, you seem consistently unhappy with me, and I want to learn how we can get along and show our kids a happy home that is harmonious and not tense, and not giving them all little headaches and stomach aches out of anxiety because all we do is bicker with each other. And most women, especially the ones big into emotional labor, because they care a lot about the kids, will, even if they hate you for saying that, they will go, because their worst fear is being a bad mother. And that can be mobilized effectively, because the reality is it's true. You're both being bad parents if you're fighting in front of the kids. Not like I'm blaming you, it's not blame, but is it good for the kids to fight in front of them? Certainly not. Could you be doing better by not fighting in front of them? Yes. Do most people fight about these issues? Yes. If these are hot button issues, then most people mention them in front of the kids. They feel like it's not sex, it's not drinking, it's not this, it's not that, but I can talk about division of labor and emotional labor. But if you talk about anything in a tone with knives in your voice, metaphorically, so tense and so bitter, then that is bad for the children. So you may love your children very much. Wonderful. Use that as a motivator to get into couples counseling and actually transform the tenor of the home into something that is more peaceful, where people can understand that each other is valuable and speak to each other with respect, and understand, what an emotional load is, if there is one, and split it without it being, beyond the pale and not even possible with one person looking down at the other. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and it was obviously, a topic that I like to talk about, and you can do more research on it on my site everywhere. And I'll talk to y'all soon. Have a great day, guys.